Dillon Gabriel's name shouldn't be in the same conversation as Myles Garrett, but thanks to Jason Lloyd it now is. In recent coverage, Lloyd praised Gabriel and Dorian Thompson-Robinson while criticizing Garrett and Shedeur Sanders, raising immediate questions about bias. Then came the bombshell. Lloyd called for the Browns to trade Garrett, despite his statistically unmatched season. The optics couldn't be worse.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
A white quarterback with no NFL accolades gets uplifted, while a black defensive superstar is discarded as expendable. It's not just a pattern, it's a problem. Garrett isn't a trade chip, he's the blueprint for what teams dream of drafting. In a league starved for elite pass rushers, moving on from the reigning sack leader makes zero strategic sense. Lloyd's take isn't just out of touch, it reveals how far certain media voices are willing to go to push narratives that don't reflect the field. Jason Lloyd said the Browns should trade Myles Garrett. Let that sit for a second. Not bench him. Not critique a bad game. Not call for improvement. No, trade him. After a historic season where Garrett didn't just lead the league in sacks, he led it in pressures, hits, and had a 7-sack game. A once-in-a-career highlight reel, career-cementing performance that made offensive lines look like high school practice squads. And Jason Lloyd's response was, time to move on. That's not analysis. That's detachment from reality. And everyone knew it. Fans, analysts, players, and pretty much anyone with a basic understanding of football lit up the internet in disbelief. Because there's a difference between having a bold opinion and blatantly ignoring everything we just witnessed. Let's be clear. Myles Garrett had a historic 2024 to 2025 season. Not good. Not great. Historic. He led the league in all major defensive categories. He was ranked the #1 edge defender in the NFL by Pro Football Focus. He did it while the team around him struggled with leadership changes, inconsistent play, and chaos in the front office. Garrett didn't waver. He produced at an elite level week after week. You don't trade that. You build around it. You lock it in and never let go. But Jason Lloyd saw a franchise cornerstone and decided it was time for a rebuild. And not just any rebuild, one that involves dumping the most dominant pass rusher in the league for, what? A few draft picks and a vague hope that someone better might show up? It's not just illogical. It's insulting. It ignores how rare it is to even find a player like Garrett, let alone keep him healthy, productive, and loyal through a storm of organizational instability. And it completely disregards the fact that there is no successor to Garrett on that roster. No one even close. The Browns aren't overflowing with elite defensive talent. This isn't a depth chart full of Pro Bowlers. It's Garrett, then everybody else. Which is why this wasn't just a controversial take. It was a revealing one. Because it didn't come from nowhere. It came from Lloyd, a journalist with a pattern. And that's where this entire situation shifted from bad football analysis to something much more serious. Lloyd didn't just say something unpopular. He reignited a conversation that's been simmering for a long time about how black athletes are covered in sports media, how their success is often minimized, how their value is questioned in ways their white counterparts rarely face, and how narratives are shaped not by data, but by bias. This wasn't the first time Jason Lloyd had taken aim at a black Browns player. Earlier, it was Shedeur Sanders, another high-potential, highly scrutinized talent. And like clockwork, Lloyd was ready with criticism, questioning Sanders' readiness, his upside, his fit. Meanwhile, quarterbacks like Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Dillon Gabriel, less accomplished, less dominant, got praise, got patience, got the benefit of the doubt. That double standard isn't a coincidence. It's a red flag. And people saw it. Because this Garrett take didn't happen in isolation. It happened after that pattern was already forming. And when you step back and look at it all together, it doesn't feel like random hot takes anymore. It feels targeted. It feels like the athletes being elevated don't always match the athletes performing. That's where people started asking harder questions. Not just, why would you trade Garrett? But, why are these takes so consistently aimed at black players with proven track records? Because that's the heart of the issue. Garrett isn't just good, he's the best. And still, his future with the team was questioned by someone who's supposed to know better. Someone who's paid to evaluate performance, not invent drama. And no, it's not a stretch to say this reflects a systemic issue. The media has a long history of framing dominant black athletes differently, calling them inconsistent when they have an off game, while white players are developing, labeling them emotional or difficult when they speak out, while white players are seen as fiery or passionate. It's the same old script. And Garrett? He's done everything right. He's shown up. He's stayed out of trouble. He's led by example. He's dominated every year, and somehow he's the one being tossed into trade rumors? Not because of a contract issue. Not because of declining play. But because Jason Lloyd thinks the Browns can find someone better? Better than the #1 edge rusher in the league? This is where the football argument completely breaks. You can't justify trading a player with Garrett's output, especially in a league where elite edge rushers are the second most valuable assets after quarterbacks. You don't give that up unless you're trying to tank. You don't risk gutting your defense unless there's a replacement already waiting. And there isn't. There is no modern front office that would greenlight that move. And if they did, they'd be out of a job by Monday. So when someone like Lloyd pushes that idea, it's not just about bad strategy, it becomes a statement. A signal. That even when you're dominant, elite, disciplined, and loyal, if you don't fit a certain narrative, you're still disposable. That's what people responded to. Not just the football angle, but the way this moment fits into a much larger issue. And through all of it, Garrett has said nothing. He hasn't clapped back. He hasn't dragged anyone on social media. He's let the numbers talk. He's let his tape speak. He's let the silence say what it needs to say. Because Garrett knows who he is. He knows what he's done. He doesn't need to respond to a journalist scrambling for clicks. But that silence? That's also telling. Because Garrett knows that no matter how dominant he is, there are always going to be people trying to chip away at it. Trying to shift the conversation. Trying to frame it as valuable, but. And the moment fans saw it happening again with this player after this season, they didn't stay quiet. Because they knew this wasn't about football. This was about control. About media figures deciding who gets to be a hero and who gets to be a headline. And Jason Lloyd? He played himself. Because now the conversation isn't about Garrett's future. It's about Lloyd's credibility. And it's not looking great. When your arguments go this far against the evidence, when your targets follow a pattern, when your reasoning starts sounding more like provocation than journalism, people stop listening. You can't lead the discourse if you're not grounded in reality. And Garrett's reality is this. He's at the top of his game, he's indispensable to his team, and no amount of spin can change that. So while Lloyd tries to steer the narrative, the truth is this. The Browns don't need to rebuild around Garrett, they need to keep him as the centerpiece. Because you don't trade away the best part of your team. You build everything else to match his level. If you're done with bad takes that ignore facts and push tired narratives, hit that like button. Share this with someone who still thinks Garrett's value is up for debate. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Does this feel like a football discussion or something deeper? And if you want real breakdowns, real accountability, and real coverage that isn't built on spin, make sure you're subscribed. Because moments like this, they're not going away. But we'll be here to call them out every single time. Here's the part where things go from ridiculous to revealing, because even as the internet exploded, even as analysts, fans, and former players called him out, Jason Lloyd didn't walk it back. He didn't clarify, didn't reframe, didn't pause to say, maybe I went too far. He stood by it. He stood by the idea that the Cleveland Browns, one of the most consistently unstable franchises in the league, should trade away their most stable, most elite, most valuable player. You almost have to admire the audacity, if it wasn't so reckless. Because here's what this really shows. When someone's more committed to controversy than credibility, no amount of logic can get through to them. It didn't matter that Myles Garrett had the kind of season that defensive coordinators dream about. It didn't matter that he was the league leader in sacks, pressures, and hits. It didn't matter that he recorded 7 sacks in a single game, a feat so rare it's practically mythological in modern football. Jason Lloyd ignored all of it. Because the narrative he wanted was louder than the numbers. And that right there? That's the problem. This wasn't just a bad take. It was a textbook example of a media figure choosing engagement over substance. Because deep down, even Lloyd had to know how absurd the take was. You don't accidentally stumble into trade Myles Garrett unless you're trying to break the internet. And that's what this has become. Media figures manufacturing chaos for clicks, riding waves of outrage and treating players, especially black athletes, as pawns in a game of viral content. Because Garrett didn't do anything wrong. He didn't underperform. He didn't cause drama. He didn't show up late or mail it in. He delivered one of the most statistically dominant seasons in league history, kept his head down, and led by example. He was the Browns' anchor in a year defined by instability. And yet, that's the guy Jason Lloyd wanted out the door. Let's be clear, the suggestion that Garrett should be traded has zero support from actual football decision-makers. There's no general manager in the league that would move a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, let alone one in his prime, for future picks and a reset button. The risk alone would be career suicide. Because you don't replace a player like Garrett. You hope to find someone half as good in the draft and pray they pan out. This isn't fantasy football. This is the NFL. And the Browns, for all their flaws, know better than to blow up the one part of the roster that actually works. So if that logic doesn't hold up and the numbers don't support it and the league's front offices wouldn't entertain it, why is Jason Lloyd saying it? That's where things get uncomfortable. Because when you take a step back, this isn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It's a trend. Earlier this year, Lloyd went after Shedeur Sanders, another black player. Another Browns-linked talent with real upside and a strong resume. Lloyd picked him apart, called him unready, overhyped, not the answer. Meanwhile, quarterbacks like Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Dylan Gabriel, both white, both less proven, got praised. Elevated. Framed as promising and overlooked. And suddenly the Garrett take doesn't feel like an isolated bad call. It feels like part of a larger pattern. A pattern where black athletes are dissected and doubted, even when they're succeeding. Where white athletes are celebrated for potential, while black athletes are questioned despite production. Where the standard keeps shifting depending on who's being covered. This is where it stops being about football and starts being about credibility. Because when your coverage consistently favors one group while scrutinizing another more harshly, people notice. And when it happens repeatedly, they stop calling it coincidence and start calling it bias. This is the moment we're in with Jason Lloyd. He's not being called out because he criticized a player. He's being called out because he ignored reality to push a take that fits a tired, damaging pattern. And when the backlash came, he didn't listen. He just got louder. The worst part? Garrett isn't even a polarizing figure. He's not controversial. He's not outspoken. He's not part of the off-field headlines. He shows up, plays, dominates, and leaves. If he were anyone else, if he had a different background or a different style, he'd be untouchable. Just look at how Aaron Donald was treated at the height of his powers. Or how TJ Watt is covered. They have seasons like Garrett just had and the media celebrates them. They're called generational. Franchise cornerstones. You don't trade a guy like that, the narrative goes. But Garrett? Same stats. Same dominance. And somehow he ends up on a hypothetical trade block? That's not football logic. That's narrative bias. The numbers say Garrett is the best. The tape says Garrett is the best. The locker room, the analysts, the opposing coaches, they all say Garrett is the best. But Jason Lloyd saw something different. And that difference can't be explained by stats or film. That difference is where the credibility breaks down. Because if your job is to analyze performance and you're this wrong about the most dominant performer in the league, what are you even watching? And more importantly, why are you watching it that way? These are the questions that don't go away. Not after this kind of controversy. Not after this kind of pattern. Because fans aren't just reacting emotionally, they're reacting logically. They're looking at the evidence and realizing that some players have to do more just to be given the same respect. And they're not letting it slide anymore. Sports journalism has reached a point where accountability matters more than ever. Fans are smarter. They have access to film, to advanced stats, to player tracking and analytics. They can spot bad faith arguments and biased narratives instantly. And when someone like Lloyd steps this far out of bounds, there's no walking it back quietly. The damage is done. The credibility is cracked. And the conversation has shifted. Myles Garrett isn't going anywhere. He doesn't need to respond. He doesn't need to justify his worth. He's already done that on the field. And while Jason Lloyd argues from a place of provocation, Garrett will keep operating from a place of performance. Because legacy doesn't get built by words. It gets built by what you do between the whistles. And Garrett? He's building something that can't be touched by bad takes. The irony is Lloyd may have tried to spark a football conversation, but what he really started was a long overdue discussion about media bias, narrative framing, and how we treat black athletes who've done everything right. That conversation's not ending anytime soon. And neither is Garrett's reign. The moment Jason Lloyd hit send on his Myles Garrett trade take, he didn't just toss out an opinion. He launched a full-blown controversy. Because that one comment, that the Browns should trade Garrett following the firing of Kevin Stefanski, wasn't seen as a strategy suggestion. It was seen as a slap in the face to one of the few bright spots in an otherwise unstable franchise. And once the public heard it, there was no walking it back. It wasn't bold. It wasn't edgy. It was absurd. And when people pushed back, they didn't just push back hard, they brought receipts. Let's start with the reality Lloyd ignored. Garrett is not just a good player having a good year. He's a generational talent in his prime, dominating in ways few defensive players ever have. This past season he didn't just lead the league in sacks, he led in pressures and hits. He logged a 7-sack game, something that puts him in a tier of his own. Pro Football Focus, one of the most data-driven evaluation platforms in the league, ranked him as the top edge rusher in football. And still Lloyd said, trade him. To say that suggestion lacked logic is putting it lightly. It ignored every cornerstone of modern team building. In a league where elite pass rushers are treated like royalty, and where impact defenders can single-handedly keep teams competitive, the idea of shipping out the best one in the NFL for potential draft capital is delusional. Especially when there's no successor. No replacement. No scheme fix that could even pretend to plug that hole. Garrett is the defense. He draws double and triple teams. He sets the tone in the locker room. He's disciplined, reliable, and consistently excellent, even when the Browns were falling apart from the top down. Coaching instability, quarterback uncertainty, front office issues. Garrett remained elite through it all. So again, why trade him? This is where the controversy really picks up steam, because once people started asking that question, they didn't like the answers they found. It turns out this wasn't the first time Lloyd had dished out disproportionate criticism to a black athlete. Earlier it was Shedeur Sanders. And just like with Garrett, Lloyd was quick to throw cold water on his prospects. Doubt his readiness. Downplay his upside. Meanwhile, Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Dylan Gabriel, white quarterbacks with significantly less to show, got praised. Suddenly a pattern emerged. And when patterns emerge in sports media, they don't go unnoticed. Because fans aren't stupid. They know when criticism is fair and when it's loaded. They can tell when someone is calling it like it is, and when someone is selling narratives to stir the pot. And Jason Lloyd? He didn't just stir the pot, he flipped it over. He may have tried to frame his take as pragmatic, but nobody bought it. Because trading away your best player, the one consistently outperforming expectations, isn't a rebuild, it's sabotage. And when you only seem to suggest blowing up the careers of elite black players, that's no longer a football opinion. That's a bias in plain sight. The league doesn't operate like that. And neither do fans anymore. This isn't the 1990s, where you could get away with surface-level arguments and expect people to just nod along. Today, fans have access to all the data. The film, the stats, the trends. They know who's producing and who's not. And the numbers don't lie. Garrett's dominance isn't up for debate. It's documented. So when Lloyd pushed that take, people weren't just mad. They were insulted. Because it felt like a direct hit on the idea that black excellence, no matter how proven, is never quite safe. That even when you break records and anchor a team through dysfunction, you're still seen as tradable. As if dominance isn't enough unless it comes from the right person with the right narrative behind them. And the comparisons were quick. Aaron Donald never faced this talk. TJ Watt never faced this talk. Those guys have been treated as untouchable, even when their teams were struggling. They were protected, revered, praised, and they should be. But so should Garrett. Because what he's done is just as historic, just as valuable, just as irreplaceable. But instead, Lloyd positioned Garrett as disposable. Not because he had regressed. Not because of locker room issues. But because, in his words, the Browns might be able to find better players. Where? What draft board has someone better than Garrett waiting in the wings? There isn't one. And the idea that a team would willingly roll the dice, hoping to find a fraction of what they already have? It doesn't just break football logic, it exposes how far people are willing to go to push a narrative, even if it means losing credibility in the process. And that's where Lloyd finds himself now. His credibility is shot. Because when you advocate for trading away greatness, especially the kind that's holding together a fractured franchise, you better have airtight reasoning. And Lloyd didn't have that. He had a weak premise, a predictable backlash, and a platform that he used to double down instead of reflect. And that tells you everything. Because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up. It was intentional. Lloyd wanted to be provocative. He wanted the heat. He wanted the reaction. And he got it, but not the way he thought. What he got was a reckoning. People started combing through his past takes, noticing the pattern, calling out the imbalance. And now this isn't just about Garrett. It's about the broader issue of how black athletes are covered in sports media. The uneven playing field. The constantly shifting goalposts. The quiet, and sometimes not so quiet, undermining of success when it doesn't fit a certain mold. And Garrett? He stayed silent. He didn't need to clap back. He didn't need to tweet. He didn't need to say a word. Because everything Lloyd ignored, the dominance, the professionalism, the leadership, is on tape. In stats. In team impact. In plain sight. And while Lloyd scrambles for relevance, Garrett continues building a Hall of Fame caliber legacy. One sack, one forced fumble, one record at a time. The Browns aren't trading him. They know what they have. And the fans? They've made it clear, Garrett isn't just a good player. He's a symbol of everything the team should be investing in. Discipline. Excellence. Consistency. Loyalty. And maybe that's the most frustrating part of all this. That in a season where the Browns were at their messiest, Garrett was at his best. And still, it wasn't enough to keep the media vultures at bay. Because some people don't care about performance. They care about headlines. But here's the thing, headlines fade. Highlights don't. If you're with us and you're sick of takes that ignore stats, logic, and common sense like this video, share it with someone still trying to justify Lloyd's argument. And drop a comment. What do you think this says about how elite black athletes are covered in today's media? Are you seeing the same patterns? And make sure you're subscribed. Because we're not done exposing the worst takes, the messiest narratives, and the loudest voices that somehow miss the obvious. When the truth gets buried under bias, we dig it back up. Every time.